everyone, and welcome to a poetry reading from Deaf, Open, and Virtuous Woman, a book by Dr. Suzanne Ondrus. My name is Bienvenue Kansimbo. Hey! And I am the founder of Girl Now Women Leader, a 501c3 organization serving middle and high school girls in underserved areas of Burkina Faso, West Africa. What is Girl Now Women Leader about? Boys grow beards and girls have a menstrual cycle. This is our commitment to normalizing the menstrual cycle in Burkina Faso, West Africa. We have found that the stigma about menstruation causes girls to skip school, isolate themselves, and feel ashamed. Girl Now Women Leader educates to reduce the period stigma for girls in Burkina Faso. We educate them to not skip out on life. Donors help to provide free feminine products, support menstrual education workshops in school in Burkina Faso, stop the period stigma. Become a donor today and help stop this stigma while supporting girls to live a full life. As a reminder, there will be questions in the chat and there will be a time at the end to go over them and read response, have a discussion. Please allow me to introduce our guest, Dr. Ondrus Suzanne. Suzanne Ondrus' first poetic book, Passion Seed, an American and Burkinabe love story addressing racism in an interracial and intercultural relationship, won the 2013 Venice Quevedo Prize. She was Golden Square Review's 2022 Prose Runner-Up winner, Georgia Park's 2022 Prose winner, Read Magazine's 2013 Markham Poetry Prize winner, a 2017 Future UNESCO World Book Capital Poet in Guinea-Conakry, and from 2018 to 2020, a Fulbright Scholar to Burkina Faso. Her work delves into different cultures, history, racism, body image, African fashion, and women's sexuality. Her newest poetry book, Death of an Unvirtuous Woman, examines domestic violence in an 1881 Ohio German immigrant couple. Hear her on her YouTube channel, Suzanne Ondrus, and find her updates on SuzanneOndrus.com. Please welcome Dr. Suzanne Ondrus.
Hey, thank you, Bienvenue, for that warm welcome. I'm happy to be here and support Girl Now, Woman Later. Okay, so we're going to talk about A Death of an Unvirtuous Woman, which is my book that just came out a couple months ago. And it deals with the murder of Mary Bach in 1881 by her husband, Karl Bach. They were a German immigrant couple to Ohio. They had been in the country around 20 years or more. And Karl Bach had been saying how he was going to kill his wife. Nobody really heeded him. To me, what is egregious is that the newspapers victim blame Mary Bach. And so the title of my book, Death of an Unvirtuous Woman, is a way to fight back at the victim blaming from the newspapers. So to say that she has been killed twice, once by her husband and a second time by the newspapers. Let's see. Okay. So I want to touch a little bit upon the link between domestic violence, victim blaming, and menstruation shaming, to keep this in mind before the reading. Shame is a way to confine and contain. So it makes people limit their discussions, to limit their movements, and the public aspect of shaming enhances its punishment and strengthens its power to confine people. So whether we're talking about a bunch of children laughing and pointing at a girl that has a spot of blood on her dress, or we're talking about a newspaper that publicly is printing to say that the woman was not friendly, sort of she deserved this murder. These are public spheres and ways where people are publicly made to feel inferior. And when you're made to feel inferior, you don't feel like fighting and standing up. So just as a girl, that if she's been shamed in school, she doesn't feel like going back again, right? And this is the link that I'm making between these two topics. So victim blaming as violence uses words in a public sphere. And often the words stay with us years and years later. So, and there might be specific words that get said in schools towards girls. And as we'll look at in this book, there are specific words that the newspapers of 1881 to 1883 used to shame and contain. Oh, we have another person. Welcome, Carol. I'm so glad you could join us. So we're talking about victim blaming and the link between domestic violence and also menstrual shaming that happens in the public schools and schools in Burkina Faso and West Africa. And so shame is a way to make people feel inferior, make them feel that they just want to disappear, they don't want to stand and resist. And especially when it's done in a public way, people they don't want to feel bad in front of other people. And so the newspaper around the murder of Mary Bach from 1881 to 1883 used words to shame Mary Bach. And the way that it was presented was that Mary Bach was deserving of being murdered. And this is called victim blaming. And so I'm going to point out 3 specific words. The newspaper Bowling Green used these 3 words: termagant, which means an overbearing, harsh, tempered, or nagging woman; virago, a loud, domineering, violent, overbearing woman, a female warrior; and slatternly, of a woman or her appearance dirty and untidy. All 3 of these words are only for women. You cannot use these words for men. I was drawn to reading the newspaper from 1881 to 1883 in the museum around Bowling Green, Ohio, where this happened. I didn't know what these words were before. And I was very surprised looking them up to find out that they were all for women. The newspaper, for example, in 1883, the Wood County Sentinel said, quote, "Mary Bach had not the most angelic of dispositions. She was stubborn and headstrong, a sort of termagant or virago at times, and was slothful and slatternly, almost filthy at times in her personal and housekeeping habits." This came out in the testimony at the trial. Now, the interesting thing talking about Mary Bach with the Historical Society of Bowling Green is that the man who wrote this newspaper article never met Mary Bach. He never met the Bach family. And there were a bunch of women who buried Mary Bach, who bathed her bloody body, took care of her, so she was loved. As we know very well today, sensationalism makes money. And the Wood County Sentinel made a profit off of Mary Bach. And they made a profit from a stereotype. They fed into people's imaginations and already what they felt that, okay, these are the traits that women have to have. And if a woman speaks out and asserts herself, she's a bad woman. Well, Mary Bach did speak out and assert herself. She filed for divorce. She filed a restraining order. She was protective of her family. And that was known in the community. And certainly as the author of the newspaper was a man, we could assume that this was not welcome. So I'm going to read some poems, just a few.
Okay.
I picked out about 5 poems, so it'll be short. The first poem I want to read to you is written in the style of a wanted ad. So think of those Westerns where they'd have a wanted ad for a villain, you know? Mm-hmm. And I was trying this form for a poem to see what would come out of using a different approach. And we get something that's provocative to turn, again, the victim blaming around and to critique how Mary Bach was disrespected by the newspaper. So it's called Notice. Reward of 5 oil wells and continual mouths on your dick, if brought in silent and limp like green onions, 5 days old, for the apprehension of one Mary Elizabeth Bach, alias Thunder Wolverine, woman of sizable stature, wide shoulders, capable of hauling 2 water-filled buckets each, unkempt, fingernails filled with dirt, stern eyes. Beware, has honey locust mouth that looks and smells sweet, but can shred with its thick thorns. She is considered capable of withering all of your acres of corn with one sole stare. If you see her, go straight to Sheriff Reed. Wanted for pickling her husband's manhood, for all of Milton Center to see, read, and hear. July 22nd, 1881. So it's a critique of the gender roles and the assumed, also on a base of fear of a woman being powerful to strike out on her own. And okay. The next poem takes its subject matter of those 3 words, termagant, virago, and slatternly. And I thought how powerful just those 3 words were. And I thought back to how in colonial times, people were punished with tar and feather. They would coat the person in tar. It was hot. It would burn their skin. And then they would roll them in feathers. And I thought how what happened to Mary Bach was similar. It wasn't physical in that way, but yet the black letters are also like tar. So this is a very short poem. It's called The Power of the Pen. Mary was 3 words, termagant, virago, and slatternly. The 10-inch long corn knife delivered her to the tar of words slated for women. And those words turned Mary into pure pulp. So to say, the newspaper, the paper is made from pulp, and to say that Mary became reduced to nothing but material for the paper. And also in terms of the murder, Mary Bach was murdered with this 10-inch long corn knife, a very long knife, and brutally cut up. And she was also 7 months pregnant when this happened. And pregnancy is a dangerous time for domestic violence. There's an element of jealousy, but there's a fair statistical number of abuse that happens at this time. And then, of course, as well, when a woman leaves her partner or husband, files for divorce or leaves, that is also a very dangerous time. And so it's important to be aware of that information. And this next poem is inspired by the idea of being tarred and feathered by the newspaper. And again, thinking of those words, those 3 words. Tarred and feathered by the Wood County News, slovenly like her stained dress, virago like 1,000 pitchforks in her mouth, termagant like a tornado touching down, slovenly, virago, termagant, branded, muddy boots, ripped clothes, stained shirts, gruff tones, harsh words, stern eyes, and swift pushes to her dead female flesh. Slovenly, virago, termagant. These 3 words box solid rules against female steps. So again, it's to keep her in place, how shame contains, and those words would be words that no no woman wanted to be labeled with. And so also to think of the other women reading the newspaper and their reaction to the narrative of Mary Bach and how it affected their own lives. One of the historians at the Historical Society, where this happened, told me that one woman before Mary Bach was murdered had given her shelter one night when there was a domestic violence altercation. But she felt pressure from her husband that she couldn't let her stay longer. And so it was only it wasn't a second time or third time that she could go back there. So again, there's a lot of pressure as to perception and what people think. And this poem, this is the second to the last that I'll read, is from the perspective of Karl Bach. And it's taking an imagination of Karl Bach speaking at the court to defend himself. And he speaks about his anger at his wife demanding fair treatment, anger at his wife fighting back with him and resisting him. And so in this poem, he's basically saying a woman, a wife is inferior and they should be in their place. And you all know that. It has a couple German words. Meine Frau means my wife. And let's see, du Arschloch, Arschloch is you asshole. And verdammt, damn, and geschissen shit, shitted. And all right, so that's it. Okay. Lightning shift of narrative. When I grab a stick to lick, I didn't think to kill. You see, meine Frau made a 9-foot fire in me with her mouth. Du Arschloch, prepare your own verdammt dinner and wash your own geschissene sheets. When she locked me out of my house, she lit that pyre. I blazed and blazed, enraged at being shut out and made to feel so klein. I had to knock her into a woman's place below me, her husband, had to shove her mouth down to the ground so my voice thundered to make her realize it was me, her husband, she must heed. And again, this is imagining that certainly many men probably felt that same way, that a woman, their wife, was supposed to be underneath them, and they probably would have agreed with Karl. This last poem is about the brutal murder. So what happened and in the murder, and then also the backstory of their economical problems. So financial pressure is a pressure for domestic violence. It's not an excuse, but there are a lot of contributing factors. And another can be cross-cultural homesickness. It could be if there's maybe a death of a child, or there are family strife, lots of different reasons. I want to also let you know that, yes, indeed, sadly, the children witnessed the murder of their mother. They were in the bedroom where they saw this happen. Okay, so they were about, I think 2 to 14 years old. So you had a whole range. You had 3 children in the room watching this happen. And when you think about the generational trauma of this, the horror of this. And so some of my poems, I won't read them tonight, but some of the poems have the children speaking about the murder. How would the children have spoken about seeing their mother murdered by their father? Silenced, her throat. He grabbed, then lit for the barn, returned, not with a stick. There, the apple tree stood. You are going to go, not me. There, little Mary, with her blanket over her eyes, wet herself. He shoved his wife like he shoved a slow cow inside the barn, her cheek never on a pillow more than 5 hours. He sliced clear to her ear that had caught the baby's phlegm coughs. He flayed her strong voice that called dinner 5 times to the farthest field to a whimper. He gorged her clucks. Not enough money to go to the fair this year. Not enough money for a trip to Cleveland. Not enough money to buy a new wagon. And flung them on the bedroom wall. There, Katie backed against the hearth, along with a tuft of snarled hair. Slovenly, he thrust through and through, trenched out the roses she never knew. The termagant and virago varnished the walls, mirror, floor, and door with her blood. Air flooded in, filled his lungs. Quiet. Little Carl wore his mother's blood, her blood that gave 4 lives. A willow split by lightning. The door didn't protect her. The peace warrant didn't protect her. Her own son didn't protect her. The 50 years staticked in Milton Center that had heard Carl's crisp death threats didn't protect her. The smoldering strikes stillness, silence, and we remember just a moment before it scavenged the ground. So thank you, and I'm happy if we have any discussion or questions.
We do have quite a few. There is in the chat, let me scroll down to the first question. Okay, at the beginning, there is a question about the 3 characteristics you mentioned about the description of Mary Bach. There is a question related to that. 1 second. My fingers. Okay.
Okay, so the 3 words mentioned?
Yes, 1 second. It's just that this thing I cannot. Okay, for the 3 words mentioned, will we consider a modern day version of these crude names for a woman similar to calling a woman a bitch?
I don't think that these are. I don't know if they're quite on the same level, but maybe someone who is immersed in the language of the 1800s would be able to say. But if anything, they're almost maybe worse because they're very specific as to labeling the behavior. A woman who defends herself, speaks out, and to say what that behavior is, and that, oh, that's not right for a woman.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
But I think it's a good starting point to think that how often, conversely, do we slap that label, a present day bitch, on women of a whole variety of spectrums, right? That maybe they're leading a meeting and they're going to get called this, right? They're asserting the rules. They're just stating, well, the rule says this, so I think the connection between the present word and these older words is that it's a way to shame and contain, because no woman presently likes to be called this word, right? And these words that the newspaper used too would be shocking. They wouldn't be something where they're viewed favorably. I think they have a negative connotation to them, but I'm not sure that they have that sort of vulgarity to them. But that's something I'd have to check with a linguist. In the time, was that vulgar to print? I sort of doubt they would be printing vulgarities, but definitely the same of shaming containing.
Okay. Next question. Is it possible that men experience a shame about their partner menstruating because they don't understand it?
Well, I think a lack of knowledge is definitely problematic. And I'd make an analogy to racism, that often people are racist because they're ignorant, right? So I think that when men understand and boys understand that they wouldn't be here unless their mother menstruated, then they would have respect.
Okay. So some of the few social pressure I can say will be shame, isolation, definitely, because when he happens to the girl at a certain age, especially at a younger age, she is in a stage that she doesn't know what's happening to her body or to herself, and she's afraid to go talk to any member of her family because there is no conversation around that. So, and if God forbid that it happened that when she was at school and she got a spot stain somewhere on her dress, that occasioning would cause a public shame, and that would make her to be isolated and not to wanting to be around her friends and probably stay at home, and that will also cause on a short or long term for her to skip classes and sometimes even school because of that shame that she experienced publicly. So it's hard for her to forget about that kind of situation when it happens to her. So shame, isolation, those will be the social pressure that she probably would experience whenever she menstruated or whenever she has a first period. Between violence against women and violence against girls and women who menstruated. Okay.
I think we talked at the beginning of the presentation about at least what I'm seeing, and feel free if anyone, I'll recap what I said, and then if we have other ideas to add to it,
Okay.
that keeping women in their space and through physically beating them up to be inferior to men, and then also through mocking women about being on their period, as we saw President Trump doing this, oh, there's blood coming out of her mouth. I mean, to the point where even, so alluding to women menstruating and mocking them, even if they don't know, the man doesn't know if they're menstruating, versus they know that they're menstruating because they see blood, on their dress or something. And as a way to a man to tower over a woman, to physically tower over, to emotionally tower over. Do we have any other ideas about that topic? Anybody else would like?
I don't know if I can unmute themselves because they're all muted.
Oh.
Okay, I just got a question. Do you think people, boys or men, are quick to chalk up strong women and girls as aggressive or emotional because of the menstruation? I can repeat it. Do you think people, boys or men, are quick to chalk up strong women and girls as aggressive or emotional because of the menstruation?
Well, I think definitely there's this stereotype that if women are emotional, then they're, or a stereotype that women are irrational, and they're, because they have emotions and they show their feelings, they're irrational and somehow inferior to men. Mm-hmm. And it's a shame. We really need to embrace more female culture leadership instead of women taking men's, let's say, culture as something to model. We need to really balance the male and female culture where we accept the feeling aspect, intuition aspect, which is really of humanity, right? And our feelings tell us a truth very often, and they help us make decisions and think through different decisions as well.
To piggyback on the same question, the person continues saying, same with Mary Back, who was pregnant. How can we break these stereotypes?
Well, I think that the more fair news portrayals we get, that's one thing. And the more women coming into the public sphere, I'm really happy that we're having more women in Congress now, the House of Representatives, because we are learning, oh, women can be in politics. And when you think back to 200 years ago, the role for women in the public sphere was very narrow. At most, they were in the church speaking, in the out sort of social sphere of the church, and in their house. But so the more that we get out into different roles, I think that's very helpful. And I think too, if we can definitely point out when someone says a stereotype, maybe we're at a meeting and somebody says, comments that, oh, what's up with her? Is she on her period? We need to say, that's really sexist, that's inappropriate. And it takes courage to stand up to people like that.
And to piggyback on what you just said, I think on this modern day, there's a lot of change, like you mentioned. So it's not like before women were not part of the solution. So now women are becoming part of the solution. So therefore, somehow there is a support somewhere, even if it's an anonymous group, anonymous community. She probably, whoever is in that kind of situation, I don't know what probably the country type it will be, but somehow I'm praying that there is somebody she can turn to and probably ask for help, or maybe with social media, for example, or maybe some of the government agency that we have now for that helping to point out the women domestic violence. So there are lots of agencies under the government that existed, that didn't exist before, that are advocated on women's behalf. So with that in mind, I think we are pretty kind of on the route to being in a good hands, if I can say that, better than before, better than Mary back time when she was living.
If you mentioned social media, that I would point out the Me Too movement.
Exactly.
And how so many women before suffered from sexual harassment, sexual abuse. And when everybody started saying Me Too, you got the power of the movement together. And so, yeah, social media is great. And I love the analogy, Kelly, that you said about the women burned at the stake for being different or speaking out. And that's just it, that at a base, it's the difference. But then we look at how come men haven't been persecuted like witches? There were a few male witches burned, but in Burkina Faso, they still persecute women as witches. And in Ouagadougou, there's a colony for witches. One of my students, when I was teaching there, said his grandmother was a witch. He believed it, and she was living in the colony. It's very interesting that maybe they get labeled a witch when the husband wants a second wife or something, or there's some economical gain, these things. So being burned at the stake for speaking out and being different maybe sometimes it comes down to plain politics about power.
Yes.
Kelly?
Okay. So this concludes our online reading, and we want to thank everyone who took part. If you would like to stay updated with Girl Now Women Leader, you can visit our website at www.girlnowwomenleader.com, .org, or .com, or .net, or on our social media account.
Thanks so much. This was great.
Okay.
Good, you're welcome.
Bye. Bye, Kelly.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you.
Ondrus.
Okay.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Good night. Thanks.
Bye. Good night.
Bye.
Thanks for coming, Carol.
Oh, you're welcome. It was really great. I enjoyed.
Oh, good.
Thank you.
Yeah.